I was about to confront the godfather of my son with his pants around my wife's ankles. Yeah, you heard that right. But let me backtrack a bit. You know that gut feeling, the one that gnaws at you when something's off? I'd been ignoring it for weeks. Claire, my wife of 10 years, had been acting strange, but I chalked it up to stress. I had no reason to doubt her until recently. She had been spending more time with Mark, our son Michael's godfather, who had been a close family friend for years. Too close, I guess. It wasn't that I distrusted her at first. Hell, I didn't even question their late-night chats or how her mood seemed to lighten whenever Mark was around. It was subtle, you know? Like one of those things that you wouldn't think twice about until it slaps you in the face. So, there I was, coming home from work earlier than expected because Michael had a fever at school. I'd left work in a rush, barely glancing at my phone, too concerned about picking up my kid. The minute I walked in, something felt wrong. You can tell when a house is too quiet. I couldn't find Claire or Mark anywhere, so I wandered upstairs. That's when I heard it. Voices. Low murmurs behind the door of our bedroom. What happened next would change everything. I wish I could say there was some grand moment of clarity, some cinematic revelation where everything clicked in my mind. But that's not how it happened. What I felt was more like a slow, suffocating crush. It started with little things, the kind you ignore because you don't want to seem paranoid. Claire's smile that didn't quite reach her eyes when I came home from work. The way she'd leave her phone face down on the kitchen counter. The unexplained absences, errands that always seemed to take longer than they should have. But I dismissed it. I didn't want to be that guy, the one who couldn't trust his own wife. Besides, I had no concrete reason to doubt her. Or at least, that's what I told myself. Things really started to shift after Michael's last birthday party. Mark had come over, like always, with his usual over-the-top gift. He doted on Michael like a proud godfather, always going above and beyond. But that day, something felt different. There was a moment, just a fleeting one, when I saw the way Claire looked at him. It wasn't a look you give to a friend. It wasn't even a look you give to someone you're fond of. It was a look that belonged in a bedroom, not in front of your husband and your 7-year-old kid. My stomach tightened, but I brushed it off. Maybe I was imagining things. People don't just betray you out of nowhere, right? I wanted to believe that Claire was still the woman I married. I wanted to believe that Mark was still my best friend, the guy I trust with my life. But then came the day it all fell apart. It started like any other Friday. I was running late for work, fumbling around the kitchen for my keys, when Claire strolled in, looking a bit too polished for a simple day of running errands. She said she was heading out to meet some friends, nothing unusual. Except it was. There was this shift in her tone, a slight hesitancy in the way she said it, like she was waiting for me to question her. I didn't. Instead, I kissed her on the cheek, told her I'd see her later, and left for the office. I thought about it all day, that odd moment in the kitchen. By the time lunch rolled around, I was on edge, replaying every conversation we'd had in the past few weeks. My gut told me something was off, and for the first time, I didn't ignore it. I decided to go home early, something I rarely did. I told my boss I had to pick up my son from school because he wasn't feeling well. In truth, I just needed to get out of the office, clear my head, and figure out what the hell was happening in my marriage. As I drove home, my mind raced. Maybe Claire was just stressed, maybe I was overthinking it. But part of me knew that wasn't the case. I couldn't shake the image of her and Mark at Michael's birthday, the way they seemed to exist in their own little world, like I was an outsider in my own home. When I pulled up to the house, the driveway was empty. Claire wasn't home, and Michael was still at school, so I figured I'd relax for a bit before I had to go pick him up. I walked inside, tossed my keys on the counter, and froze. Claire's phone was sitting there. And it wasn't face down. I shouldn't have looked. I know that. But curiosity and fear are a dangerous combination. I wasn't proud of it, but I grabbed her phone and opened it, half expecting to find nothing, half expecting to see my worst fears laid bare. And there it was. A message from Mark. The goddamn godfather of my son. Miss you already. Can't wait to see you tonight. I stared at the words on the screen, my heart pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. The air felt thick, like I couldn't breathe. Every part of me wanted to smash that phone against the wall, but I needed to know more. I scrolled through their conversation, my hands shaking. It wasn't just flirtation. It wasn't just casual banter. It was detailed, explicit, and frequent. The kind of messages that made it clear this wasn't some new fling. This had been going on for a while. My head spun, and for a second, I thought I might throw up. I dropped the phone on the counter, staring at it like it had physically hurt me. In a way, it had. It felt like I was watching my life unravel in real time, like everything I thought I knew was being ripped out from under me. I don't know how long I stood there, paralyzed, before my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was the school, reminding me to pick up Michael. I grabbed my keys, the phone, everything in a haze, and drove to his school. The entire time, my mind raced. Should I confront her right away? Should I wait? Should I talk to Mark? How the hell do you even start a conversation like that? Every scenario played out in my head, none of them ending well. When I arrived at Michael's school, I forced a smile, greeted him like nothing was wrong. He didn't notice anything off, thank God. I couldn't bear the thought of him knowing what was happening, not yet. I drove us home, all the while trying to keep myself together. Michael chattered away about his day, completely unaware that his father's world was crumbling. When we got back, Claire still wasn't home. Part of me hoped I'd misread everything, that this was all just some misunderstanding. But the messages were burned into my brain, impossible to erase. I tried to distract myself, helping Michael with his homework, making him dinner. But my mind kept circling back to those words, those intimate exchanges between my wife and my best friend. Finally, around 7, Claire walked in. She was all smiles, acting like nothing had changed, like she hadn't just spent the day with another man. I watched her, every detail now magnified. The way she casually set her purse down, how she greeted Michael with a hug and a kiss, how she avoided making eye contact with me. I felt like a stranger in my own home. I couldn't take it anymore. After Michael went to bed, I confronted her. Not gently, not with tact, but with the kind of raw anger that had been boiling inside me all day. I didn't even give her a chance to sit down before I threw the phone on the table. What the hell is this? She froze, her eyes widening as she glanced down at the phone. For a second, I thought she might try to deny it, to make up some bullshit excuse. But she didn't. She just stood there, staring at the screen like it might explode. Answer me, I said, my voice low, barely controlled. Claire looked up at me, her face pale. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. I'd never seen her like that before, silent, at a loss for words. And that silence spoke louder than anything she could have said. You've been screwing him behind my back, I said, my voice rising now. How long? She flinched at the word screwing, but still didn't speak. I slammed my hand on the table, making her jump. How long? Her eyes filled with tears, and she finally whispered, a few months. A few months. That was it. Just 3 words, but they hit me like a punch to the gut. All those months where I thought we were just in a rough patch, where I thought maybe we just needed to reconnect, and all along she'd been sleeping with Mark. The betrayal was so complete, so absolute, that I didn't even know how to process it. Jesus Christ, Claire, I said, stepping back, running my hands through my hair. Mark? The godfather of our son? You're screwing the godfather of our son? She broke down then, sobbing into her hands, but I couldn't even look at her. I couldn't stand the sight of her, the sound of her crying. It all felt like too much, like everything was crashing down on me at once. Get out, I said, my voice hoarse. I can't even look at you right now. Just, get out. Claire didn't argue. She grabbed her keys and left without another word, the door slamming behind her. I stood there in the empty kitchen, staring at the phone on the table, the messages still glowing on the screen. The house was silent, except for the faint sound of Michael's TV in his room. The life I thought I had, the marriage I thought was strong, had been a lie. A lie built on months of betrayal, and the worst part? It wasn't even over yet. That night, I didn't sleep. I couldn't. After Claire walked out, the silence in the house became unbearable. Every sound felt magnified, the ticking of the kitchen clock, the hum of the refrigerator, even my own breathing felt too loud. Michael was asleep in his room, unaware of the chaos that was boiling beneath the surface. I sat there at the kitchen table for hours, my mind racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. There was nothing to make sense of, though. The facts were staring me in the face. Claire had betrayed me. Mark, the man I thought was my closest friend, had betrayed me. And they'd been carrying on like this for months. All while I went about my days, completely oblivious, thinking our only problems were the typical stresses of work, parenting, and life. I must have stared at that damn phone for hours, reading and rereading their messages. Every word felt like a punch to the gut. They weren't just having sex. They were talking like they were in some kind of twisted relationship. Compliments, inside jokes, plans about when they'd meet up next. It was all there, laid out in black and white. It wasn't until nearly 2 a.m. that I heard the front door creak open. Claire was back. I didn't look up when she came in. I heard her stop in the doorway, probably expecting me to still be asleep. When she saw me sitting there at the table, the tension in the room shifted immediately. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there, probably waiting for me to break the silence. I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction. "Where were you?" I asked, my voice low, steady. I didn't even look up from the phone. It was more of a rhetorical question, really. I already knew the answer. She didn't respond right away. After what felt like an eternity, she finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I went to Mark's. I looked up at her then. She stood there, arms crossed over her chest, looking small, like she was trying to fold in on herself. I had never seen her look so fragile. But any sympathy I might have had was long gone. "You went to Mark's?" I repeated, standing up from the table. I could feel the anger rising in my chest again. "You just admitted to screwing him, and now you're running straight to his house?" Claire flinched at my words but didn't say anything. Her eyes were rimmed with red, like she'd been crying the entire time she was gone. But that didn't matter to me. What did her tears even mean at this point? They sure as hell didn't mean she regretted it. If she had any real regret, she wouldn't have done it in the first place. I didn't. "I wasn't with him tonight," she said finally, her voice shaking. "I just didn't know where else to go." I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that felt like it was coming from someone else. "So, after everything, he's still the one you run to?" She opened her mouth to respond, but I didn't give her the chance. "Tell me the truth, Claire. Tell me everything." Her eyes met mine, and for a moment, I thought maybe she would. Maybe she'd finally just lay it all out, no more secrets, no more lies. But instead, she did what she always did when things got tough. She deflected. "It's not what you think," she said, her voice barely a whisper. It just happened. I didn't plan for this. I never wanted to hurt you." "You didn't plan for it?" I repeated, my voice rising. I slammed my hand down on the table, making her jump. "You've been seeing him for months, Claire." "Months? And you want me to believe this just happened?" Tears streamed down her face now, but I didn't care. Not anymore. I was done being the understanding husband. I was done trying to make excuses for her. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she said, her voice cracking. I just felt so alone." "Alone?" I spat the word like it was poison. "We have a son. We have a life. And you're telling me you were alone? How long has this been going on, Claire? How long have you been lying to me?" She looked away, wiping at her tears with the back of her hand. "It started after Michael's last birthday. I felt like the wind had been knocked out of me. His birthday was 5 months ago. 5 months of lies, of sneaking around behind my back. 5 months of pretending everything was normal while she was with him. And Mark? I asked, my voice cold. What about him? Did he feel alone, too? Is that how you justify it? How you justify this? She shook her head, but the words weren't coming anymore. She was too far gone, lost in her guilt or shame or whatever the hell it was. But none of that mattered to me. It didn't change anything. I turned away from her, running my hands through my hair, trying to keep my emotions in check. I didn't want to lose it. I couldn't afford to lose it. Not with Michael asleep in the next room. You need to tell me the truth, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. All of it. No more bullshit. No more lies. There was a long silence. I could hear Claire's breathing, shaky and uneven, but she didn't speak. I turned back to her, and that's when I saw it, the guilt, the shame, the realization that she couldn't lie her way out of this anymore. I love you, she said, her voice breaking. I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted this. I laughed again, the sound hollow, bitter. You didn't want this? You didn't want to hurt me? Claire, you've been screwing my best friend behind my back for 5 months. You chose this. Her face crumpled, and she sank into one of the kitchen chairs, burying her face in her hands. For a moment, I just stood there, watching her cry, feeling nothing. Not anger, not sadness, not even hatred. Just nothing. I don't even know who you are anymore, I said finally, my voice flat. The woman I married would never have done this. She would never have torn apart our family like this. She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen from crying. I don't know why I did it, she whispered. Mark was there, and I felt so lost, and it just happened. I shook my head. You keep saying it just happened, like you had no control over it. But that's bullshit, Claire. You made a choice. Every single time you met him, every single time you lied to me, you made a choice. She didn't respond, just stared down at her hands, her body shaking with sobs. For a moment, I just stood there, watching her. I had never seen her like this before, so broken, so lost. But instead of feeling sympathy, all I could feel was disgust. Not just for her, but for myself. For letting it get this far. For not seeing the signs sooner. For trusting her. I need to know one thing, I said finally, my voice cold. Was it ever going to stop? She looked up at me, her face pale, her eyes wide. I don't know. I stared at her, my stomach churning. You don't know? She shook her head. I didn't want to lose you. I never wanted to lose you. But I didn't know how to stop. I felt sick. She didn't even know how to stop. What did that even mean? That she would have kept seeing him, kept lying to me, until what? Until I found out? Until everything blew up in her face? I can't do this, I said, stepping back from her. I can't even look at you right now. Please, she whispered, her voice breaking. Please, don't go. I turned away from her, grabbing my keys off the table. I needed to get out of there, to clear my head, to figure out what the hell I was going to do. Don't leave, she said, standing up, her voice desperate. We can fix this. I'll do whatever it takes. I'll go to therapy. We can go to therapy. Please, just don't leave. I turned back to her, and for the first time that night, I felt something other than anger. I felt pity. Not for her, but for myself. For the man who had believed in her, who had trusted her, who had thought they could get through anything. I'm not the one who left, Claire, I said quietly. You did. And with that, I walked out the door, leaving her standing there, broken and alone. I didn't go far after leaving the house. In fact, I didn't go anywhere at all. I parked the car 2 blocks down from the house and sat there, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Claire's words echoed in my head, and I could feel the rage bubbling up inside me again. She wanted to fix things? After months of screwing Mark behind my back? After lying to me every day? Fixing things wasn't on the table anymore. I'd been a fool to trust her, to trust him. Now, the only thing on my mind was how to make sure she paid for this. I wasn't going to sit around and be some idiot who forgives a cheater just because they're sorry. Sorry wasn't going to cut it. I stayed in the car for a while, thinking about everything: our marriage, our life, our son. Claire had destroyed it all. And now she had to live with the consequences. But it wasn't going to be as simple as filing for divorce and walking away. No, I wanted her to feel what I was feeling, to know just how deeply she had shattered everything we built. But before I did anything, I needed to calm down. I couldn't afford to lose my temper. This wasn't just about me anymore, it was about our son, Michael. I couldn't blow everything up in some fit of rage and risk losing him too. I needed to be smart, calculated. The first step was getting my head straight. So, I drove. I didn't have a destination, just cruised aimlessly through the quiet streets of our town, letting my mind clear as I thought about my next move. By the time I pulled into a gas station on the edge of town, I had a plan forming. It wasn't fully fleshed out yet, but the pieces were starting to come together. I sat in the parking lot for a while, scrolling through my phone, looking up divorce lawyers in the area. It was late, but I sent an email to the top 3 firms I found, briefly explaining my situation and asking for consultations as soon as possible. I knew the legal side of things could get messy, but I wasn't going to wait for Claire to make the first move. I wanted to be ahead of her in every way. After that, I headed home. By the time I got back, it was well past midnight. The house was dark, except for the dim light coming from Michael's room. I figured Claire had gone to bed, or maybe she was still crying in the kitchen. Either way, I didn't care. I was done feeling sorry for her. I walked quietly through the house, checking in on Michael. He was sound asleep, completely oblivious to the storm that was tearing through our lives. Seeing him like that, so peaceful, so innocent, it only fueled my anger. Claire didn't just betray me, she betrayed him too. She was putting his whole life in jeopardy, and for what? A cheap affair with a man who should have been nothing more than a friend. I went to our bedroom next. Claire was sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. She didn't look up when I walked in. She must have heard me come home, but she didn't say anything. I could tell she had been crying, her eyes swollen and red. For a brief moment, I almost felt something: sympathy, maybe? But it vanished as quickly as it came. She didn't deserve it. "I'm going to sleep in the guest room tonight," I said flatly, already halfway to the door. "Wait," she said, her voice hoarse. "Please, can we just talk?" I stopped but didn't turn around. I didn't want to look at her. "Talk about what?" "You've been lying to me for months. What's left to say?" Claire stood up, taking a few steps toward me. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I know I've hurt you. I know I've made a mess of everything. But I don't want to lose you. I love you." I laughed, the sound bitter. "You love me?" "You've got a real strange way of showing it, Claire." "I didn't mean for this to happen," she said, her voice breaking. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. I was lonely, and Mark, he was just there. I know it's not an excuse, but I..." "Stop," I said, cutting her off. I didn't want to hear her pathetic excuses. "Just stop. You didn't accidentally sleep with Mark. You chose to. You knew exactly what you were doing every single time, and you kept doing it." She was crying again, but I didn't care. I wasn't interested in her tears. "Please," she said, her voice trembling. "I'll do anything to fix this. I'll go to therapy. We'll go to therapy. Whatever it takes. I don't want to lose our family. Our family." That was rich. She had already lost it the moment she decided Mark was worth more than the life we had built together. But I wasn't going to tell her that. Not yet. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of knowing what I was planning. I don't know if there's anything left to fix, I said coldly. You've destroyed everything. With that, I walked out of the bedroom and into the guest room, shutting the door behind me. I could still hear her crying through the walls, but I forced myself to tune it out. I wasn't going to let her tears soften me. Not now. Not after everything she had done. As I lay there in the dark, my mind kept racing, going over the plan I had been piecing together. I wasn't going to confront Mark yet. I wasn't going to let him know I was onto them. No, I needed to be smart about this. Claire was still clinging to the hope that we could somehow fix things, that I'd be the kind of fool who'd forgive her after all this. That was fine by me. Let her think that. Let her think I was broken and beaten down. That way, when I finally made my move, it would hit her harder. The next morning, Claire tried to act like things were normal. She made breakfast for Michael, packed his lunch, and even asked me if I wanted coffee, as if we weren't living in the aftermath of a nuclear blast. I played along. Not because I wanted to, but because it was part of the plan. If she thought I was softening, she wouldn't see what was coming. We barely spoke to each other, but that was nothing new. Claire went about her day as usual, and I left for work. What she didn't know was that I had taken the day off. I didn't go to the office, I went straight to the lawyer's office. The email I sent the night before had gotten a quick response from a top-tier attorney in town, and I was determined to meet with her as soon as possible. When I sat down with my lawyer, Marcia, I laid everything out. The affair, the months of lies, everything. Marcia listened carefully, asking questions where needed, but mostly just taking notes. She didn't seem surprised by any of it, which told me she had probably seen this kind of thing more times than she could count. Do you have any evidence? She asked when I was finished. I nodded. Yeah, I've got the texts. I found them on her phone last night. And I'm sure I could get more if I need to. Good, Marcia said, nodding. We'll need all the evidence we can get. It'll help with custody arrangements, alimony, everything. Now, do you want to file for divorce immediately, or do you want to wait a bit? I leaned back in my chair, thinking. Filing immediately would be satisfying, sure. But I wasn't ready for that yet. I wanted to make sure Claire felt the full weight of her decisions before she knew what was coming. I wanted her to think she could save the marriage, that she still had a chance. I want to wait, I said finally. I need time to gather more evidence, and I want her to think we're working on things. Marcia nodded. That makes sense. We can take our time with this, but I'd recommend starting the process sooner rather than later. You don't want her to get the upper hand. I'll be ready, I said. We went over the details of what the divorce would look like. Child custody, division of assets, all the usual stuff. The more we talked, the more I realized just how much leverage I could have if I played my cards right. Claire was the one who screwed up, and I wasn't going to let her walk away without paying for it. When the meeting was over, I left the office with a renewed sense of purpose. I wasn't going to let Claire or Mark destroy my life without consequences. They thought they could get away with it, that I'd just roll over and let them have everything. But they were wrong. I spent the next few days playing my role. I pretended to listen when Claire brought up therapy, nodding along whenever she talked about how sorry she was. I didn't push her away when she tried to make small talk or offer to help around the house. I let her think we were on the path to reconciliation. And the whole time, I was gathering more evidence, digging deeper into her texts, her emails, even her social media accounts. It didn't take long. The idea of confronting Mark had been gnawing at me from the moment I discovered his betrayal. The man had not only betrayed my trust but had crossed a line that no friend should ever even approach. And the fact that he had done it so casually, sneaking around with Claire while still acting like the godfather to my son, only made me want to exact my revenge in a way that would hit him hard. But I wasn't going to do anything rash. No, I wanted to make sure I had the upper hand, just like I did with Claire. I wasn't some hot-headed fool who'd go in swinging blindly. I needed to be smart about this, make sure every piece fell into place perfectly before I made my move. The first step was getting more evidence. Sure, I had enough on Claire, but I needed to know more about Mark. I needed to understand how deep this went, what his life looked like, and how I could dismantle it in a way that would leave him with nothing. So I started digging. The thing about people like Mark is that they think they're invincible. They think no one will ever figure out their secrets. But when you're determined and have the right tools, it's easier than they think to pull the curtain back and see who they really are. I knew Mark wasn't perfect. He had that smugness about him, that confidence that only comes from someone who believes they can get away with anything. But I wanted specifics. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. Mark wasn't just a cheater, he was careless. He'd been seeing Claire for months, yes, but I soon found out she wasn't the only woman he'd been sneaking around with. Turns out, Mark had a little habit of chasing after women, even while pretending to be the responsible family man. He wasn't married, but he'd been in a relationship with a woman named Melissa for the past 3 years. They had even bought a house together. From the outside, they looked solid, another happy couple. But behind the scenes, he was running around like a dog off its leash. I knew Melissa casually, just enough to have seen her at a few gatherings with Mark over the years. She seemed like a nice woman, the kind who probably thought she had it all figured out with Mark. Little did she know the man she'd built her life with was nothing but a liar. I knew what I had to do. But first, I needed to set the stage. I couldn't just waltz in and drop a bomb on Melissa's life without making sure everything lined up. I started small, gathering all the messages between Claire and Mark, and then I went a little further. I had friends who were good with tech, let's just say they knew their way around certain digital spaces. It didn't take much for them to find out that Mark had been messaging other women too, using burner apps and disposable email addresses. He was clever, but not clever enough. With a little digging, I found a few of his other flings, some as recent as a month ago, others stretching back for years. He had a pattern. He'd meet these women, charm them with his friendly demeanor, and then move things into a sexual relationship without any of them knowing about the others. He wasn't just cheating, he was building a whole separate life on the side, and none of these women had a clue. I sat down one evening with a glass of whiskey in one hand and my phone in the other, compiling everything. Messages, pictures, dates, locations, it was all there. By the time I was done, I had a neat little folder of evidence that could burn Mark's entire world down. The next step was to deliver it to the right person. I had Melissa's phone number, so I decided to reach out directly. I wasn't going to be cruel about it, this wasn't her fault, after all. But I wasn't going to sugarcoat it, either. She needed to know the truth about the man she was living with, and I was the one who was going to tell her. I waited until a Saturday morning, knowing that she and Mark were probably at home together. I called her while sitting in my car outside of town, not wanting to be disturbed. She answered on the second ring, her voice cheerful, unaware of what was about to come. "Hi, Melissa, it's Matt," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. There was a pause. She sounded confused. "Matt? Oh, hey. It's been a while. What's up?" "I'm sorry to call out of the blue like this," I said, cutting to the point. "But we need to talk. It's about Mark." Another pause, this one longer. I could hear the shift in her tone, the suspicion creeping in. "Mark? Is everything okay?" "No," I said, bluntly. "Everything is not okay. I don't know how to say this without just coming out and saying it, so I'm going to. Mark's been cheating on you. And it's not just one person. He's been doing this for a long time." The silence that followed was deafening. I could almost hear her mind racing on the other end of the line, trying to process what I had just said. What are you talking about?" she finally asked, her voice shaky. "Are you sure? This doesn't make any sense." "I wouldn't be calling you if I wasn't sure," I said, my voice firm. "I have proof, Melissa. I have messages, pictures, dates. He's been seeing my wife, Claire, for months, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. There are other women too." "I don't," she stopped, clearly struggling to keep her composure. "How do you know all this?" "I found messages on Claire's phone," I explained, keeping my voice steady. "I've been digging ever since. And it turns out, Mark's been living a double life. I'm sending you everything I have. You deserve to know the truth. For a moment, there was only silence on the other end of the line. Then, I heard her take a shaky breath. Send it. I didn't hesitate. I opened the file I had compiled and sent it to her in one clean message. It's all there, I said. I'm sorry you're finding out like this, but I thought you should hear it from someone who understands. There was a long pause before she responded. Thank you, Matt. I don't know what to say. I need to process this. I get it, I said softly. Take your time. But you deserve better than this. With that, we hung up. I didn't know how long it would take for her to confront Mark, but I knew it wouldn't be long. People like him always think they're in control until everything comes crashing down. And I was more than happy to light the match that set his life on fire. But that wasn't the end of it. No, I had more in store for Mark. You see, Mark wasn't just a cheater. He was also my business partner. That's right, the man who had been sneaking around with my wife was also the man I had trusted with my professional life. We had been working together for years, building a small but successful business. I had always assumed we were on the same page, that we had each other's backs. But after finding out what he had done, I realized just how foolish I had been. So, while Melissa was dealing with the personal fallout of Mark's betrayal, I was working on dismantling the professional side of things. Our business was built on trust, our clients trusted us, and I had trusted Mark to handle his side of things. But I wasn't about to let him keep profiting from our partnership after everything he had done. I spent the next few weeks quietly gathering information about our business dealings. Mark had always been a little sloppy with his paperwork, leaving most of the administrative stuff to me. That worked in my favor. I found discrepancies in the accounts, little signs that he had been skimming money here and there, probably to fund his extracurricular activities. It wasn't enough to land him in jail, but it was enough to cause a serious problem for him if I brought it to light. So, I did. I contacted our biggest client and set up a meeting without Mark's knowledge. During that meeting, I laid everything out: how Mark had been mismanaging funds, how he had been putting the business at risk with his reckless behavior. I didn't mention the personal stuff, that wasn't relevant. But the financial side of things? That was more than enough to make them reconsider their relationship with us. By the end of the meeting, it was clear that our partnership was over. Our client pulled out of the deal, citing concerns over Mark's handling of their account. It was a huge blow, one that would send shockwaves through our business. And I knew it was only a matter of time before Mark found out. When he did, it wasn't pretty. He stormed into my office the next day, his face red with anger. "What the hell is going on?" he demanded, slamming his hand on my desk. Our biggest client just pulled out, and I had no idea this was even happening. I looked up at him, calm, collected. "I know," I said. "I had a meeting with them last week." Mark's eyes widened, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of fear behind his anger. You went behind my back?" Mark stood there, seething, his fists clenched at his sides. The redness in his face was intensifying by the second, and for once, I had the satisfaction of watching him lose control. Normally, he was the one with the smug grin, the cool demeanor, as if nothing could touch him. Not anymore. "I did what had to be done," I said, my voice level. "Our biggest client was pulling out because of you, Mark. I didn't go behind your back, I did what you were too distracted to handle." He slammed his fist down on my desk, rattling everything on it. "Distracted? What the hell are you talking about? You don't get to make decisions like that without me. We're partners." I leaned back in my chair, folding my arms across my chest. Were we partners, though? Because I'm starting to think we weren't. A partner doesn't lie to you for months. A partner doesn't sleep with your wife. Mark froze. His expression changed in an instant, from rage to something else. Panic. It was subtle, but it was there, a flicker in his eyes, a slight tremble in his hands. I could see him scrambling to come up with some kind of defense, some way to talk his way out of this. But he wasn't fast enough. "That's right," I said, standing up from my chair. I know everything. I know about you and Claire. I know how long it's been going on. And I know you've been using business trips and late nights as excuses to see her. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He just stood there, staring at me, his face pale. I could see the gears turning in his head, trying to figure out how I had found out, what he could say to salvage this. I've got proof, I continued, my voice cold. Text messages, emails, locations. I've even got photos of you two sneaking around. So don't even bother denying it. Mark took a step back, his hands raised defensively. Matt, listen. I can explain. It wasn't what you think. It wasn't. Don't, I said, cutting him off. I don't want to hear your excuses. There's nothing you can say that'll change what you did. You've been screwing my wife, and you've been lying to me every single day. Do you really think you can just explain that away? His mouth opened and closed a few times, but no sound came out. He was floundering, completely unprepared for the confrontation. Good. I wanted him off balance, wanted him to feel what it was like to have everything ripped out from under him. I trusted you, I said, taking a step closer to him. You were my best friend, Mark. I let you into my life. I let you be the godfather of my son. And this is how you repay me? Matt, please, he said, his voice shaking. I'm sorry. I know I messed up. I know I shouldn't have, but it just happened. I didn't plan for this. Claire and I. Don't you dare try to blame this on Claire, I snapped, my voice rising. She's not innocent in this, but you don't get to act like this was some accident. You knew exactly what you were doing, and you kept doing it. Mark ran a hand through his hair, pacing in front of my desk like a caged animal. I know. I screwed up. But it doesn't have to end like this. We can figure this out. We can go back to how things were. We can fix this. Fix this? I repeated, incredulous. There's no fixing this, Mark. You destroyed everything. He stopped pacing and turned to face me, desperation written all over his face. Look, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but we've built something here. We've worked so hard to get where we are. Don't throw it all away because of one mistake. I shook my head, feeling the anger bubbling up again. One mistake? This wasn't a mistake, Mark. This was a conscious decision you made, over and over again. And you didn't just screw me over personally, you've been screwing me over professionally too. I know you've been skimming money from the business. His eyes widened in shock, and I could see the panic rising in him again. What? No, I didn't. Don't lie to me, I said, cutting him off. I've gone through the books. I know exactly what you've been doing. You've been funneling money into your personal account, using company funds to finance your little adventures with Claire and God knows who else. You think I didn't notice? He was shaking now, his hands trembling as he tried to come up with some kind of defense. But there was nothing he could say. I had him cornered, and we both knew it. Here's what's going to happen, I said, stepping around my desk to stand in front of him. You're going to sign over your half of the business to me. You're going to walk away with nothing. No buyout, no severance, nothing. You're going to disappear from my life, from Claire's life, and from Michael's life. Do you understand me? Mark's face went pale, and for a moment I thought he might actually pass out. You can't be serious, he whispered. I built this business with you. You can't just cut me out like that. I can, I said coldly. And I will. You've left me no choice. I can drag this out in court if you want, but I promise you, I'll win. I've got all the evidence I need to ruin you personally and professionally. Or, you can sign the papers and walk away quietly. It's your call. He stood there, staring at me, his face a mixture of disbelief and desperation. He knew he was trapped, but he didn't want to accept it. For a moment, I wondered if he'd try to fight back, if he'd try to save whatever scraps of his life he had left. But then I saw the defeat in his eyes, the moment he realized he had no way out. "Fine," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'll sign the papers." "Good," I said, stepping back. "I'll have them drawn up by the end of the week. And just so we're clear, if I see you anywhere near Claire or Michael again, I'll make sure everyone knows what you've done. I'll ruin you, Mark." He didn't respond. He just stood there, staring at the floor, completely broken. I didn't feel any satisfaction in that moment, just a cold, empty sense of finality. Mark had been my best friend, my business partner, my son's godfather. But now? Now he was nothing. "Get out," I said quietly. Mark hesitated for a moment, as if he wanted to say something else. But in the end, he just turned and walked out of the office without another word. As the door closed behind him, I sat down in my chair, letting out a long breath. It was done. I had cut him out of my life, out of my business, out of everything. It should have felt like a victory, but instead, it just felt hollow. I had spent so much time focusing on my revenge, on making sure Mark paid for what he had done, that I hadn't stopped to think about what would come after. I had dismantled his life, but my own life was still in pieces. But it wasn't over yet. I still had Claire to deal with. That night, I got home late. Claire was sitting on the couch when I walked in, her face pale, her eyes red from crying. She looked up at me, but I didn't say anything. I walked past her and went straight to the guest room, closing the door behind me. I didn't want to deal with her right now. I didn't want to hear her apologies or her pleas for forgiveness. I lay down on the bed, staring up at the ceiling. I had taken care of Mark, but now I had to figure out what to do about Claire. She had destroyed our marriage, our family, everything we had built together. And while I had no intention of staying with her, I knew I couldn't just walk away without making sure she understood the full weight of what she had done. I needed time to think. I needed to figure out how to deal with her without letting my emotions get the better of me. But one thing was clear, this wasn't over. Not yet. The next morning, I woke up with a dull, throbbing ache in my chest. The kind of ache that wasn't going away anytime soon, not until this was finished. I had dealt with Mark, and I should have felt some relief, but the weight of everything still sat heavy on me. The real problem was still in front of me, Claire. She wasn't just some cheating wife to me. She was the mother of my child, the woman I'd built my life around. Even now, knowing what she'd done, it wasn't as simple as cutting her off and walking away. We had a son, Michael, to think about. And despite everything, part of me still couldn't fully process the depth of her betrayal. I stayed in the guest room that night, just as I had every night since I found out about the affair. She didn't come to the door, didn't try to talk. Maybe she was waiting for me to make the next move. Maybe she was just afraid of what I'd say. I didn't care what her reasons were anymore. It was time to have the conversation neither of us could avoid. It was time to decide what came next. After I showered and dressed, I walked into the living room. Claire was sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly at her coffee mug. She hadn't touched it. She looked like she hadn't slept much, and I noticed for the first time how much she had aged in the past few months. She'd lost that spark, that energy she always had. Now she just looked tired. Good. Let her feel it. Let her know what it's like to be broken. I stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her, wondering where we had gone wrong. When had we stopped talking? When had we become strangers? I thought back to the early years of our relationship, before the marriage, before the stress of work and parenting. Back when everything was simple. But the memories were hazy, and no amount of reminiscing could change the fact that those days were long gone. Now, all that was left between us was a mess of lies, betrayal, and broken trust. Finally, I stepped forward, making enough noise that she looked up. Her eyes were red, swollen from crying again, but I didn't care. I wasn't interested in her tears anymore. I was done. It didn't take long. The idea of confronting Mark had been gnawing at me from the moment I discovered his betrayal. The man had not only betrayed my trust but had crossed a line that no friend should ever even approach. And the fact that he had done it so casually, sneaking around with Claire while still acting like the godfather to my son, only made me want to exact my revenge in a way that would hit him hard. But I wasn't going to do anything rash. No, I wanted to make sure I had the upper hand, just like I did with Claire. I wasn't some hot-headed fool who'd go in swinging blindly. I needed to be smart about this, make sure every piece fell into place perfectly before I made my move. The first step was getting more evidence. Sure, I had enough on Claire, but I needed to know more about Mark. I needed to understand how deep this went, what his life looked like, and how I could dismantle it in a way that would leave him with nothing. So I started digging. The thing about people like Mark is that they think they're invincible. They think no one will ever figure out their secrets. But when you're determined and have the right tools, it's easier than they think to pull the curtain back and see who they really are. I knew Mark wasn't perfect. He had that smugness about him, that confidence that only comes from someone who believes they can get away with anything. But I wanted specifics. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. Mark wasn't just a cheater, he was careless. He'd been seeing Claire for months, yes, but I soon found out she wasn't the only woman he'd been sneaking around with. Turns out, Mark had a little habit of chasing after women, even while pretending to be the responsible family man. He wasn't married, but he'd been in a relationship with a woman named Melissa for the past 3 years. They had even bought a house together. From the outside, they looked solid, another happy couple. But behind the scenes, he was running around like a dog off its leash. I knew Melissa casually, just enough to have seen her at a few gatherings with Mark over the years. She seemed like a nice woman, the kind who probably thought she had it all figured out with Mark. Little did she know the man she'd built her life with was nothing but a liar. I knew what I had to do. But first, I needed to set the stage. I couldn't just waltz in and drop a bomb on Melissa's life without making sure everything lined up. I started small, gathering all the messages between Claire and Mark, and then I went a little further. I had friends who were good with tech, let's just say they knew their way around certain digital spaces. It didn't take much for them to find out that Mark had been messaging other women too, using burner apps and disposable email addresses. He was clever, but not clever enough. With a little digging, I found a few of his other flings, some as recent as a month ago, others stretching back for years. He had a pattern. He'd meet these women, charm them with his friendly demeanor, and then move things into a sexual relationship without any of them knowing about the others. He wasn't just cheating, he was building a whole separate life on the side, and none of these women had a clue. I sat down one evening with a glass of whiskey in one hand and my phone in the other, compiling everything. Messages, pictures, dates, locations, it was all there. By the time I was done, I had a neat little folder of evidence that could burn Mark's entire world down. The next step was to deliver it to the right person. I had Melissa's phone number, so I decided to reach out directly. I wasn't going to be cruel about it, this wasn't her fault, after all. But I wasn't going to sugarcoat it, either. She needed to know the truth about the man she was living with, and I was the one who was going to tell her. I waited until a Saturday morning, knowing that she and Mark were probably at home together. I called her while sitting in my car outside of town, not wanting to be disturbed. She answered on the second ring, her voice cheerful, unaware of what was about to come. "Hi, Melissa, it's Matt," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. There was a pause. She sounded confused. "Matt? Oh, hey. It's been a while. What's up?" "I'm sorry to call out of the blue like this," I said, cutting to the point. "But we need to talk. It's about Mark." Another pause, this one longer. I could hear the shift in her tone, the suspicion creeping in. "Mark? Is everything okay?" "No," I said, bluntly. "Everything is not okay. I don't know how to say this without just coming out and saying it, so I'm going to. Mark's been cheating on you. And it's not just one person. He's been doing this for a long time." The silence that followed was deafening. I could almost hear her mind racing on the other end of the line, trying to process what I had just said. What are you talking about?" she finally asked, her voice shaky. "Are you sure? This doesn't make any sense." I wouldn't be calling you if I wasn't sure, I said, my voice firm. I have proof, Melissa. I have messages, pictures, dates. He's been seeing my wife, Claire, for months, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. There are other women too. I don't. She stopped, clearly struggling to keep her composure. How do you know all this? I found messages on Claire's phone, I explained, keeping my voice steady. I'd been digging ever since. And it turns out, Mark's been living a double life. I'm sending you everything I have. You deserve to know the truth. For a moment, there was only silence on the other end of the line. Then, I heard her take a shaky breath. Send it. I didn't hesitate. I opened the file I had compiled and sent it to her in one clean message. It's all there, I said. I'm sorry you're finding out like this, but I thought you should hear it from someone who understands. There was a long pause before she responded. Thank you, Matt. I don't know what to say. I need to process this. I get it, I said softly. Take your time. But you deserve better than this. With that, we hung up. I didn't know how long it would take for her to confront Mark, but I knew it wouldn't be long. People like him always think they're in control until everything comes crashing down. And I was more than happy to light the match that set his life on fire. But that wasn't the end of it. No, I had more in store for Mark. You see, Mark wasn't just a cheater. He was also my business partner. That's right, the man who had been sneaking around with my wife was also the man I had trusted with my professional life. We had been working together for years, building a small but successful business. I had always assumed we were on the same page, that we had each other's backs. But after finding